KETK News is your local election headquarters. Good evening, folks, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm Neil Barton. Tonight, our digital special, we're going all through the propositions on the ballot this November, which are just amendments to the Texas Constitution. We're just 1 week away from Election Day, and we want to make sure everybody has the information they need, because you know what? How many times have you walked into that voting booth or whatever, and there's a slew of propositions there, and for most of them, you have no idea what they even mean. The questions are usually influenced by lobbyists and lawyers, so we'll talk about that later on if my guests dare do that. Joining me tonight is Mark Owen. He is Owens, I should say. He is a political science professor at the University of Texas at Tyler, and his wife Katie, who is a history professor at Kilgore College. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate that. So your name is Owens. At one time we thought it was Owen, but it's Owens.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And you're both affiliated with the League of Women Voters, right?
Yeah, actually.
So tell me a little bit, first of all, about the League before we start. What do you guys do?
Well, we do all sorts of things. We just like
education,
stuff
like this,
voter education in particular.
Debates. You guys host debates, yeah?
Yeah, we host a lot of events in town as well. Next year is a big year for us with the 100-year anniversary.
I can imagine.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
Yeah, so we're gearing up for that.
So have you guys been paying attention to these propositions? Because sometimes folks walk in and go, what does this mean? So you know what? Here's why we're doing this tonight, folks, because you know what? If you walk into that voting booth and you don't know what to do, what lever to pull or whatever you do nowadays, that's your fault, because we're going to tell you what you need to know. First of all, numero uno here, Proposition 1. And once again, in a few moments from now, we'll have Phil Praisen from Austin, our political contact, there to talk. So once again, this ballot item, Proposition 1, would allow a person to hold more than one office as a municipal judge at the same time. Introduced by Representative James White. He's from Southeast Texas during the last session, and is one of the 3 prompts that didn't receive any opposition. Texas House Research Organization argues if this is passed, it will allow smaller municipalities to have more qualified judges. So as we discuss this reminds me of my history here, the old Lyndon Johnson law. Whenever he ran for that, but he could still be that. Yes. So I guess that's one thing they're trying to not have here, right?
Yeah, so a lot of kind of smaller, more local offices like county commissioners, justices of the peace, notary publics, they can hold more than one elected office.
They can, okay.
So this is just allowing municipal judges to do the same thing. Now, it's important to note that municipal judges can actually be appointed to more than one judgeship anyway.
At one time for them.
Yes.
But you can't hold 2 offices, though.
Right.
So this is what this is all about. Because some folks may say, I have bone to pick with that. What about you, sir? What are your thoughts?
Well, in this case, if they have the legal expertise, right, and they can serve at different levels, then I think that should be open, right?
Well, some of those jobs are like part-time jobs, right?
Exactly. So it's 2 part-time jobs.
So it's not like you're working 80 hours a week being whatever. And
you think about this, in many of their cases, a lot of their elections are actually run by the tax assessor, too. So a lot of people, one person wears multiple hats in their own municipal governments.
Okay, so write that down. Anything else on Prop 1 before we move on to Prop 2? Yeah. All right, Proposition 2 right now is water infrastructure. Sometimes people hear that and their eyes film over, but you shouldn't, because that is basically about smaller communities that want to install water and sewer lines. What do you have to say about that?
So I believe all citizens deserve clean water, and this is just a way for smaller communities, particularly those that aren't as economically developed, to put in place some of these projects, sewer lines, clean water lines for their citizens.
And whenever you bring up things like this, people are kind of, what is this about? So we have a story about that. We're running it right now.
Towns in central Texas like Canyon Lake, Harper, Comfort, and the unincorporated area called Green Pastures can't always raise the money locally to put water and sewer pipes in the ground. They look to state lawmakers and the Water Development Board to help pay.
We all know that every single Texan deserves clean water in their home and to be healthy and safe. You can't have that without running water.
Driftwood Democrat Representative Aaron Zwiener tells me the fund has helped more than 40,000 people over the years. The thing is, it's out of money. So the proposition would direct $200 million in bonded state debt to the fund for low-interest loans. That could pay for about half of the to-do projects on the list. Now, some conservatives voted against the idea because it would add to state debt. The idea passed 114 to 27 in the House, 22 to 8 in the Senate.
The reason people are against it is if you really want to be fiscally responsible, but they think that it's free money, but it's not free money. Okay, these are low-interest loans.
I spoke with Fredericksburg Republican Kyle Biederman through FaceTime. He tells me local areas would have to match some of the money. Both Biederman and Zwiener support the proposition, and now it's up to the voters.
I just feel that it might be best for the people to have a say-so. And so give it a statewide, let the people make a decision whether they want these things in law, but also some of these that become part of our Constitution.
Now this, if Proposition 2 passes, some of the places in East Texas that would qualify are Van Zandt County, Marion County, and Trinity County. Right now we'll check in with Phil Prazen, who joins us now from our Austin newsroom. So Phil, you covered this story. This was your story. What do you have to tell us about it?
Well, Neil, the big thing about this, and also a lot of these constitutional amendments, is they were really non-controversial, or, the voting majority to pass them to this point. They were so overwhelming. There's a higher threshold in the state government to put something on the Constitution. So yes, an example like this, there were some votes against it in the House and fewer in the Senate. But I mean, the big important thing, like the people we talked to today, Kyle Biederman, he associates with the Tea Party end of the Republican Party. Erin Zwiener, also from Central Texas, but associates herself with the more progressive side of the Democratic Party. So really, if Proposition 2 and many of these propositions are on the ballot, they have a broad-ranging support, and that's kind of what you'll find for a lot of these. And then also, the only thing I'll say on the water infrastructure is you have to be an economically distressed area. So there are a couple areas in our neck of the woods, but most of these are going to be along the border in the Rio Grande Valley, in the El Paso area. These are communities that really can't generate enough money locally through property taxes or maybe randomly sales taxes for cities, but they can't do it themselves, so it really becomes a state responsibility to make sure that those extreme low-income areas and those sometimes rural areas have clean pipes and sewers that I guess we would find a everyday benefit of living in America. So I don't see very much pushback or organization to stop this proposition from happening.
So Phil, stay with us now. We had some technical difficulty getting you piped in from Austin, but just to make it up to you, we'll bring you some Danishes in a couple of hours. So don't worry about that, okay? Hang with me, all right? So Mr. Owens, what do you have to say about this?
One of the things is that it's limited, right? $200 million for each one of the grants. And so that tends to allow some kind of fiscal responsibility for each one of the projects going there. So.
All right, sounds good. We talked about water. All right, on now to Proposition 3. Now, sometimes this happens that are out of people's control, and people need a break. This proposition would allow a temporary tax exemption for areas designated as government-declared disaster areas, such as Twisters that devastated the city of Alto last April. If approved, House Bill 492 would go into effect and set guidelines for when and how the government can allow exemption. So let's talk about this proposition right now. What say you about that?
One of the things is where the exemption is going to allow you the 15%, 30%, 60%, depending on the amount of property damage. But it really allows people to come back quickly, and I think in this case can be a benefit, especially to those builders in the area and people selling the goods.
Sounds good. So Phil, can you hear me down there in Austin? What do you think about this? What have you covered about this bill?
Well, this is like the Alto situation that you bring up, but then also, I mean, a lot of the state still is recovering a lot from Hurricane Harvey and the major storms we've had in the years past. I think there is still a desire from a lot of voters who go and tell their state representatives to, hey, make it easier for people to get back on their feet if they have lost property in one of these many storms, whether fires, hurricanes, severe flooding. Texas is going to have a lot of disasters moving forward, and I think they want people to be able to rebound faster, or at least that in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. That's what the voting majority of the legislature wanted to do.
Mrs. Owens?
Yeah, I think it's just important to note this has to be a governor-declared disaster area. So the governor's really in charge of kind of,
Getting the ball rolling.
Yes, exactly.
And declaring a disaster. Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely. Yeah. All right. On now to Proposition 4. Taxes in Texas, that's fun to say, is always a hot button issue, but you speak to most people around here with a paycheck, and they're proud of the fact that our state does not have a state income tax. But this proposition is raising some eyebrows, highlighting the authority that lawmakers have to impose a state income tax. I have a lot to say about this. Here's KETK State Capitol reporter to explain.
Is actually a magnet for attracting companies and people to the state.
Tyler Area Chamber of Commerce President Tom Mullins says it's a nice perk for Texas workers.
I know companies that have set up here that have attracted talent from other states, that people who come to Texas are pleasantly surprised that they get to keep anywhere from 5 to 10% extra income from their salary because they don't have to pay a state tax.
It sort of depends on what you view as the greatest problem for your pocketbook.
But experts say there's also a trade-off.
It's balanced out by our very high property taxes and very high sales taxes.
In order to impose a state income tax, we believe it would be appropriate to do that by an amendment to the Constitution.
That's already the case now. Legislators have to get voter approval if they want to impose a personal income tax. Prop 4 would make it even tougher to add that tax. It would first require a 2/3 vote in both the Texas House and Senate, and it still goes to the voters.
Right now, we don't think that there's going to be an income tax imposed, a state income tax, but in the future, if it's needed, we need that opening to have the funding go to education.
But Texans can still change the Constitution again if it passes.
There's nothing that says they can't come back later and revisit that.
Steffi Lee, KETK News.
All right, we'll talk about this right now. So first of all, a little commentary on my behalf here, because once again, I've lived in Texas most all of my life. I don't understand why we keep talking about having a state income tax. Most people don't want to have one, and I can say from living from other states, you buy a house and you look at your tax table here, and you're like, well, this is nice. It's cheaper than Texas, the property taxes are, but then again, you're hit with other taxes, and it's like, holy moly. And I'm just telling you, playing Santa Claus for lawmakers, it's a fun thing to do. So Phil, why does this keep showing back up on the ballot, and how come we have to say yes to say no?
Because politicians want to do things that make them look good. The voting majority of Texas does not want an income tax, so they keep on making it harder and harder, raising the threshold to do an income tax in the future, and that's very popular with Texas voters. I mean, every time we get crunched for money, there's always kind of those discussions, and mostly in the Democratic areas, but there are not even the voting majority out of all the Democrats that I can tell at this point. So we have money in the state budget at this point, but lawmakers still wanted to get the people involved and to have lawmakers sign off on something that they would agree with. It was very easy to do. One of the easiest things to do is to lower taxes or to make taxes, raising taxes harder to do. So this was an easy win for lawmakers, and it also kind of reinforces their current beliefs and gets voters involved. There really just wasn't very much opposition at all to this in the legislature.
This is commentary right here, but I guarantee, I would bet my house on this, that if we went ahead and went with the state income tax, the other taxes would still go up because lawmakers can't help themselves. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean 71% of Texans, according to a UT Austin Texas Tribune poll from earlier this year, 71% of respondents don't want an income tax.
Do you believe that?
I think that's pretty accurate for Texas.
All right, Mr. Owens?
Yeah, and then quite similar to that was a lot of people might not know why they're voting on this, right, in that case, but that really showed up too in the follow-up, UT Tyler poll that we had done, so 38% of the people weren't quite sure.
Sure.
But 47% supported this question. So when we think about that, only 15% opposed, and so this is likely to actually be more popular among the voters than it would be even among the lawmakers.
What really gets people's dander up is you have to vote yes to say no. So once again, this is all influenced by lobbyists and lawyers and whatever. Why is that? Can you tell me? I'm not trying to push you out in water you don't want to go in. I mean, Phil and I have to play this game, but you don't have to.
But in this case, Actually, the way the law would be written is you do have to say yes because the action has to be taken to amend that Constitution.
I just wish
to
you would
create
say,
the limitation.
do you want a state income tax, yes or no? I think that's what people want.
That would be the nice button to push, but at the same time, you're right. We have to make sure that this follows through with the rest of the Constitution.
All right. This is one that's really... Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. All right. On to Proposition 5. Voters will decide if they want to dedicate the sporting goods sales tax, so this is a good one, to solely fund state parks and historical sites. But KETK State Capitol reporter Steffi Lee shows us this will make it tougher for lawmakers to tip into those funds for other purposes, as guess what? They have before. Have a look.
A perfect day for nature's sights and sounds.
Come here pretty much weekly.
McKinney Falls State Park is where Kevin Lenning and his dog Moose come to relax.
Some fresh air, getting some exercise, hopefully see some animals, some trees.
Tax collected from sporting goods sales is supposed to help with staffing, expanding, and maintaining state parks for that same experience.
They've faced some rough times over the last decades due to kind of unstable funding, and really been on a roller coaster at times.
I know like a lot of the parks down on the coast, they get hit pretty bad with the tropical storms and hurricanes, and a lot of the stuff there is kind of out of commission for sometimes for months or years.
But State Representative John Cryer says the money hasn't always been used for its intended purpose.
The legislature hasn't held up to that promise, quite frankly. They have diverted some of that funds and used it for other programs, or used those monies for general revenues just to balance the budget and things.
If Texas voters approve Prop 5, the funds collected from this existing tax will automatically go to the Parks and Wildlife Department and the Texas Historical Commission. And shifting those funds to other areas of the budget would require a 2/3 vote in both chambers of the legislature. Olivia Sandusky, KETK News.
Okay, now Senator Judah Zaffarini, who co-authored the bill, voted against it in the end because that 2/3 out for lawmakers was added as an amendment. Got that? And she said in a statement that the option could undermine the law's original intent. Lawyers, lawyers, lawyers. So Phil, once again, let's get down and dirty with this. They're trying to make this where they can't go there and rob that to pay other things that they don't have the guts to grab money for, right?
Oh, totally. This is one of the dirtiest little secrets at the state capitol in Austin. They're called general revenue dedicated accounts. And what they are is we're going to tax you as a state. We're going to tax Phil a specific tax for a specific purpose. However, that creates a little piggy bank, and there's about 200 of these accounts that have little piggy banks throughout state government. I use piggy banks. There's a local senator, Kirk Watson, who uses that phrase. And so I actually pulled some of these numbers, and so last year there were $5.3 billion in all of these little accounts. This is from the Legislative Budget Board. And so what lawmakers do, it's not a constitutionally required requirement that you spend X on Y. So what they do is whenever they get short of money, they go to those accounts and they use it to make it look like they have more money. This is a Republican issue. This is a Democrat issue. Both sides do it. It's really a budget writer gimmick, right? So enough people got sick of them doing that with the state parks that they said, okay, we are going to constitutionally require you spend this money on this purpose. You cannot use it to balance the books when you get short of money. And in this last legislative session, we had a lot of money, so this was an easy thing to do. People kind of organized on the parks issue, but there are, dozens and dozens of these other accounts that they still do this with. This is an ongoing issue, and it's kind of split. It's not a partisan issue. It's a kind of a truth and lawmaking issue for a lot of these. It's kind of like it is the right thing to do, but also when the budget gets tight, they really don't want to raise taxes, so they go here to these other accounts, and you just have to ask individual lawmakers to make a stance on which one they would rather do. But for now, since we do have money in the state budget, they're trying to wean themselves off of this process, and this is just another step along the way.
little piggy banks. We'll roll some video right now of Tyler State Park could be affected by that. So, Mr. Owens, what do you say about that?
Yeah, this very much a yes vote supports the way that the law was written in 1993. But a big thing in this case is the thought that there's about $104 million raised from this tax when people buy their tents or they buy canoes.
Tyler State Park.
A huge thing that you have here, though, is that the state parks are only receiving $56 million in that year. So that means like $58 million is left on the table being used for other purposes in that moment.
All right, Mrs. Owens?
Yeah, and Texas Parks and Wildlife has about $800 million in needed maintenance at all of their parks.
So they need the money.
They desperately need the money, and even then it's going to take a decade or longer to make up that shortfall from the past 25 years.
Any final comments before we move on to number 6? All right, now this proposition would continue state funding for cancer research. Now, more than a decade ago, the state issued $3 billion in bonds to create the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. KETK State Cap reporter Steffi Lee breaks down why health groups say it's crucial for Texas to continue with that investment.
Many patients in Texas don't have access to primary prevention and secondary prevention screening for cancers. Breast, cervical, colon, lung, and prostate cancer.
Oncologist Dr. Deborah Patt knows catching cancer early is significant, especially with nearly 5 million Texans lacking health insurance.
A quarter of Texans that don't have insurance as adults don't have any access to that screening. It means that cancer is really deadly for them because they tend to present late stage and die as a result of their disease.
A new American Cancer Society poll shows more than half of Texas voters support renewing the $3 billion in bonds to fund cancer prevention and research for the next decade. In the past, there were efforts to make the agency self-sufficient and not dependent on taxpayers, but lawmakers overwhelmingly supported continuing state support for CPRIT this year.
90% of the money that CPRIT grants out goes toward research. That's research grants, that's recruiting scholars, and then 10% of the money goes directly toward prevention and early detection services.
Latest CPRIT-funded projects include ones that target health effects of vaping.
So there are several grants around e-cigarettes and lung cancer that will help us better understand what are the health implications of these e-cigarette use, particularly among youth.
This matters to us. We want to see better innovation in the state.
Steffi Lee, KETK News.
All right, we'll talk about this right now. And first of all, the way I read it, and just the way that I read it, I may not be correct, but most Democrats love this. Some of the Republicans are going, this sounds good, it's very heart-moving, but they have some trouble where the money's going. What do you say about that?
Yeah, but on the idea of the money going primarily maybe to those researchers, it drives to the competition of the institutions, right? With states like California, also in this case Maryland, Wisconsin, do the similar things within their states to try and build their cancer research centers so that people from across the world come to their areas. So this is huge for places like MD Anderson and others.
All right, which is one of the best cancer hospitals in the country. All right.
Yeah, I think the issue that some lawmakers have is that there was some mismanagement of funds.
I think you're
about
right.
a decade ago.
Yeah.
And that's why some lawmakers are hesitant on this one.
I got you. All right, Phil, what do you say about that? Have we lost Phil in Austin?
The original one was for 10 years, so I do imagine that this was just renewing a program that already happened. Yeah, there were some questions about mismanagement of funds in the past. I believe that was under the Rick Perry administration when he was governor, and that was really a topic going through, as it passed through the different jumps of the legislative process. But, you had, Senator Jay Nelson, who writes the budget in the Senate, was very concerned about that and wanted to make sure that the money dedicated to this goes to the right reasons. Same with Representative and Chairman of the Budget Writing Committee in the House, John Zerwas. Both of them say, yes, this was a good idea, but they wanted to make sure that the details were right in the law, that the money wouldn't be, scuttlebutted away. But as your guest said earlier, people recognize that Texas is a leader in campus or in cancer research, and those jobs will go those research jobs will go to other states if there is not funding from the state government. And so that argument was able to win the day and kind of sway some of these really fiscally responsible conservative lawmakers. They thought, hey, cancer or finding a solution to cancer is worth spending this money. They just had to find out how to make it as responsible as possible. There wasn't very much pushback in the legislature from this. This was a Republican-led idea.
Phil, thank you. On to 7 now. School finance. Ooh, it's an incredibly complex topic. Yes, it is, isn't it? This November, and you'll get a chance to vote on that again. So how you vote will help determine who is giving out billions of dollars for the next couple of years. Here's our story.
Texas has a lot of land, and with it, a lot of oil, minerals, and space for ranching. When, say, an oil company wants to use that land, they lease the land from the state. The money they pay goes into something called the Permanent School Fund. Established in 1854, this fund is worth over $40 billion today. It's the largest education endowment in the country, and it's what you're voting on with Proposition 7. Here's how the fund works now. The Permanent School Fund is controlled by the Texas General Land Office. They transfer money from the Permanent School Fund, up to $300 million, to the State Board of Education, who then uses this money to buy textbooks for students. Whatever money is left over is then sent to the Available School Fund. From here, money is distributed to Texas school districts. Voting yes on Prop 7 will change this whole flowchart. Now, instead of money going from one board to the next, the Texas Land Office or the State Board of Education will be able to distribute money from the Permanent School Fund. They'll each be able to take up to $600 million and place it in the Available School Fund, meaning as much as $1.2 billion will be available each year. The proposition also leaves room for subdivisions of both the Texas Land Office and the Board of Education, such as the School Land Board, to distribute the funds. Voting yes can mean more money for your child's school, but also more people making that decision.
All right, so you have to decide which is better for you when you go to the polls. So, Phil, school finance in Texas, oh, man, what a hot button topic. What about this prop?
It is an extremely complicated issue. However, this part of school finance isn't that complicated because at the end of the day, most of this money will all go to the same place. It ends in the same place. The real controversy or the debate over this one was who gets their hands on the money in the meantime. Does it go through the General Land Office? Does it go through the State Board of Education? Does it go to textbooks? Does it go to just the schools in general? That is what happened because there was a little of a power battle in the legislature this session between the General Land Office, who the land commissioner is George P. Bush, and then also the State Board of Education, which is elected by different regions who kind of set what's in the textbooks and pays for the textbooks. There was a little power struggle between those two groups. At the end of the day, this is the decision that they came up with, and they hope that it becomes simpler and kind of just like a lot of these constitutional amendments, they might not be super controversial to the public. There are little fiefdoms and they are little, power struggles within state government that you just got to settle in the Constitution.
All right, Phil, thank you. Mrs. Owens?
The bottom line here is this is going to double the amount of money available for schools to use for hiring teachers, building new schools, technology, all that sort of thing, which is always what's best for our students, right?
And then money is going to be very important on the same part following from the school finance questions, especially if property taxes, right, are going to be capped going forward. And so that gives us a sense. We see that also the endowments being used, right, to promote higher education. I think a lot of people want to see it also be used at the K through 12 level.
I think some people also want to make sure the money is going to be dispersed. It will be dispersed evenly and fairly, right?
Yes. And that's always been a problem here in Texas is that we have
Robin Hood.
Yeah, school districts that don't have as much money as other school districts. So I think this will just allow some of those lower income school districts to have a little bit more funding available.
Absolutely.
All right, moving on now to Proposition 8. This prop would create the Flood Infrastructure Fund. Now listen to this now. The Texas Water Development Board could use the money for flood drainage, mitigation, and control projects. Senate Bill 7 passed in the last session. It would regulate how money can be spent. Now the bill will go into effect if the proposition is approved by voters.
There'll be much better planning on the front end now, infrastructure development, mitigation work. I think, something that really will make a difference down the road if and when, we have additional natural disasters and flood problems.
And so far, the amendment has received no legislative opposition. So once again, Phil, can you say Hurricane Harvey, hurricane, the one we just had, and also there in the hill country where you are, all sorts of flash flooding?
Oh, totally, Neil. And so we already talked about that proposition that helps homeowners rebuild after floods and major disasters. This proposition would create a statewide kind of pot of money and an infrastructure plan from the state level, not just having, you know, Phil getting tax breaks for rebuilding his house, but this is also the state of Texas meant to help with some of these damaged areas, you know, because the state of Texas is just going to have a much larger pot of money than Phil would have on their own. So a lot of this money would go to bridges and damaged schools and damaged roads and really the public infrastructure part of it, where, you know, Phil's local, you know, private insurance, flood insurance wouldn't cover. So the utilities and the roadways and the highways and the parks, really for the public good and not just rebuilding the private goods that were lost in disasters. This was a Hurricane Harvey session. We had money at the state to pass some of this stuff. Lawmakers were not as penny pinching as they used to be, and so this really sailed through, especially in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. And let's not remember, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, Governor Greg Abbott, outgoing Speaker of the House Dennis Bonnen, they're all from that Houston area, so they really wanted to make sure that the areas damaged by Hurricane Harvey were well taken care of in the legislature.
All right, Mr. Owens.
Yes, and knowing that the idea of the future storms may come, this gives the voters a real chance to decide how we're going to spend part of that rainy day fund. I think that's important in a lot of ways if we think of how budget processes should be done, and really gives voters an important part for their vote to matter to protect them in the future.
Yeah, and it speeds up access to federal funding as well, because local governments often have to match federal funds, so it just gives them a little bit more opportunity to speed that process
All
up.
right, on to Proposition 9. This one's kind of strange, okay? Listen carefully here. This one involves your precious metals such as gold and silver, platinum, and more. If approved, Prop 9 would allow legislature to exempt property taxes for these precious metals that are being held in depositories. So now we'll talk about that. So first of all, Phil, can you hear me? We had a conference call this afternoon about this, trying to figure out exactly. So go ahead.
Well, no, this one is super interesting and it's really quirky. It's just down the street from here in Austin, in a town called Leander, we have building a Fort Knox of Texas. It's the only other publicly funded gold bullion depository in the country, and it's 23,000 square feet, and so this is really for people who have precious metals, gold, silver, diamonds, rubies, other very nice stuff. They can put it in here. They don't have to go to a private bank. They might not trust that private bank or that private vault, so now this is under the state of Texas. And if you were wondering why would the state of Texas do this, I was doing some research on this, and the Texas, let's see, University of Texas system and the Texas A&M system have more than $1 billion in precious metals that currently are currently held in a private vault, in a private bank. And so when they passed this in 2015, this depository, that was really part of the conversation of, can we use the state precious metals and hold them here in this Fort Knox of Texas? So this is a tax exemption to encourage people to use the new Fort Knox of Texas. It's ran by a private company in partnership with the Texas Comptroller's Office, which of course is under the state of Texas. It's called Lone Star Tangible Assets. That is the public-private partnership that is now in Leander, Texas.
We have a Fort Knox. You didn't know that, did you?
I did not.
How about that, huh?
Yeah.
Your comments?
Yeah. It's just going to allow Texas depositories to become more competitive with other states.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Also, though, it protects the state from potentially counties, right? I think sometimes the idea is they're holding that value of the property. It gives them a sense where that's typical part of federalism, you know, is the county going to try and tax the state for what it's holding? The state wants to protect itself from that, and as voters, you get the real chance to give that power.
Again, I hope that people are taking home from this I hope we're making it easier for folks to understand what's going on and what we're saying. If you disagree with us, that's okay. The main reason we're doing this is to open up this vein and let people know what's going on, so you just don't walk in there to that voting booth and go, well, this sounds good, I think I'm making the right choice or whatever. I mean, go home, DuckDuckGo, Google, whatever you want to do, and decide for yourself. But there's a whole lot of power here that people are surrendering if they are not informed on this, right? Yeah. All right, here we go. Number 10, voters could make it easier for retiring canine officers to spend the rest of their lives with handlers. Now, if Texas Prop 10 is approved, agencies could transfer a dog or horse or any other law enforcement animal to that animal's handler or another qualified person. Now, that's if it's in the animal's best interest. Currently, state code treats these animals as surplus property. So many entities sell the animals to the handler for a low amount of money. The trader says Prop 10 would simplify the process determining where the animals would end up. What do you think, sir?
You know, I think this could be good, right, for the owner or person who's worked for the canine. I know in particular this sounds like it works a lot like the military does, where I have some friends who have served in the military and also then bring that dog who was there.
Yeah, Mrs. Owens.
Yeah, I love this amendment. I love dogs. I love this amendment. Yeah, it just allows the dogs to stay with their handlers, the people that they know and trust.
Well, yeah. So. I have so many friends of mine who are police officers, and I'm telling you, these dogs become their children. Yes. They risk their lives with these dogs. Phil, what say you down there in Austin?
Well, this is just another example of how super specific our Constitution is. You know, when our founders created our Texas Constitution, they really didn't want a lot of bureaucrats, a lot of government officials making decisions. So they really wrote everything down. And by this amendment process and by this ratification process that we're going to go through this November, we govern by Constitution in this state. And this is just a really clear example of like how specific our Constitution is on so many different issues, and you know, these animals will now be one of them.
Okay, Phil, it's time to say goodbye here, but before we go, just anything that you want to say before we say goodnight here to the folks here in East Texas. You've been covering these issues. That's your beat at our Austin station, so what do you say?
Well, this is just a really unique opportunity for Texas voters to weigh in directly with their state constitution. That does not happen in many states across our country. It is very difficult to get through that process on a federal level. And here we are, we do it every 2 years, every 4 years, every once in a while. And so it's just a rare opportunity to feel very Texan and to have a direct say in your constitution.
All right, now we just want to remind you, Phil, thank you, by the way, that early voting is still going on right now in East Texas. So if you live in Smith County, you can vote at the Hub. That's on Ferguson Street, 8 to 5, Monday through Wednesday, and Thursday through Friday. By the way, polls are open 7 a.m., 7 p.m. Elections are being held statewide. Constitutional amendments that we just discussed. For all things elections and other news, please visit our website, easttexasmatters.com. So once again, thank you very much for joining us. Before we go, final comments.
Yeah, if you still have questions about what to vote for these amendments, you can visit vote411.org. The League of Women Voters publishes a voter's guide for every election. It's completely nonpartisan, and it's a great resource.
This is an important time, like it was mentioned. I mean, the thought is right now with these amendments, there typically is low turnout. A lot of times, if you want your voice to be heard, this is the time to do it, right? When the state typically has between 5 and 10% turnout, and you have a mayoral race going on in Houston, as well as special districts or special elections happening in Dallas and Houston areas. So
what a privilege for us voters to have this much power at our hands. Yeah. People across the world would love to have this much power. We have it right here. Many people don't show up, but I hope if you do vote, please vote. Go armed, go knowing the facts. You can walk in with a piece of paper. No one's going to stop you. You can vote or whatever. You can use a template or a guide. That's right. So once again, the League of Women's Voters encourages you to educate yourself, and thank you very much for being with us. And come back this election year, because this next year is going to be wild, okay? Yeah. We have a presidential election coming up, Congress, everything else. All right. Thank you very much for joining us tonight for this digital special on the 10 statewide propositions on the ballot this November. Have a great night, everybody, and go Astros.